I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, Mary Bendelow, who is the leader of the Parkinsons group, which meets at the church and will resume meeting this coming month in August, which we're excited about. And so I'll let Mary tell you a little bit about herself and about Parkinson's disease and their group. And I've neglected to mention at the beginning of this service that this month is Disability Pride Month. And so I think it's good that we highlight the people in our community and what they're doing with their lives and how they creatively make our whole world a better place. So, Mary, I'll go ahead and let you speak.
Everybody? My name, as you heard, is Mary Bendelow, and I am diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and I coordinate the support group, which you all have so graciously allowed to meet in your recreation hall, whatever you call that, for a couple of years now. And we went on hiatus last year with the pandemic, as did almost all the rest of the groups, but we're coming back. It's like coming out of our little foxholes. We're rejoining and looking forward to offering support among each other to people with Parkinson's or the people who support the people with Parkinson's. I was diagnosed in 2014, so 7 years ago. And Parkinson's is a disease that has an arc of about 14 to 16 years, so I'm halfway on the journey, and as you might guess, it gets a little more interesting every day. Parkinson's is a disease of the brain. It destroys neurons and nerves and prevents the production of a hormone called dopamine, which is the feel-good hormone. It's the one that helps you relax. It's called the runner's high for those people who exercise running around. And with Parkinson's, you have less and less of that over time until you start out with a surplus, and then you lose a little, and finally you don't have enough to solve the problems you need to solve. And the challenges increase at that point. So I'm 7 years into it. I figure the next 7 years probably aren't going to look a lot the same as the last 7 have been. It's a disease of subtraction. You lose the ability to do this or that gradually and eventually strongly. And it's a disease that you can't catch from anybody. You don't inherit it from anybody. You just happen to be one of those people called to join the club that no one wants to belong to with Parkinson's. So it has a variety of symptoms. I'm sure you're familiar. Probably you recognize the tremor. That's my gift for my 7th year of doing this. But tremors aren't it. Most of what happens with Parkinson's happens on the inside your skin, 97% of it. So you don't see it. But you see some visible things in some people. No two people have exactly the same constellation of symptoms, but everybody chooses, they don't choose, the disease chooses from a menu of about 30 different symptoms. And I wanted to mention them just in case you have seen any sign of that in yourself or other people. Just a second here. One-handed. I think I'm moving from the stage where people say, "You don't look like you have Parkinson's," to, "Can I help you across the parking lot?" And it seems like that transition went rather quickly last year. And I was eternally grateful for those people who walked me across the parking lot. So tremors, slowed movement. The Experience of Parkinson's is like you're walking through molasses. You walk slower than before. A lot of things you have to do consciously that you used to do automatically. What took me to the doctor in the first place were two symptoms. One was when I was walking, the left foot would take a full step forward, and the right foot would only take half a step forward. And it starts that shuffle, which I'm sure you've seen in some people walking. And, oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, that'll do for the moment. Thanks. Slowed movement. And, what took me to the doctor was that my foot was dragging on the right side of the body. And it starts on one side, and that side will forever be the stronger recipient of whatever there is. There's just more of it. You have a Parkinson's side and a non-Parkinson's side. And the other thing that I noticed was that if I was walking down the street, my left arm would be swinging, as it needs to do. That's how you keep your balance. That's one of the ways. But the right arm wasn't swinging. And so I went with those two symptoms. And I remember, of course, it's one of those things, like, do you remember where you were when? I remember that day very well, that I received the diagnosis. I was sitting in the examining room waiting for the doctor to show up, and I'm reading this poster on the wall that says, "Warning signs of Parkinson's. If you have any of these, tell your doctor." Well, by the time he walked in the door, I had read the whole list and mentally checkmarked almost everything on it as symptoms that I had seen. So I knew what I had before he ever opened his mouth. And what he said confirmed it, of course. He said, you have Parkinson's disease, and they can't diagnose that 100%. It's sort of like Alzheimer's. I have to wait to do a biopsy after you die in order to know for sure. He said, but I have accounted for 100% of your symptoms, and all the symptoms you mentioned go with Parkinson's. And so it was sort of, well, I guess that door just opened to me, and I get to go through it, like it or not. But anyway, I knew it before he ever came in the room. Didn't surprise me. So, what else do we have? Oh, rigidity. What else goes with Parkinson's? Things tighten up. I told you the brain destroys the neurons and nerves that create dopamine, which helps you relax. So you have muscles that are constantly tense, but they don't relax. Tense, but they don't quite relax. And that's cumulative over time. So things, you get stiffer that goes with it. Parkinson's is a progressive disease. It never goes backwards, it only goes forwards. And it's a deterioration of function over time. So a further symptom, and this I'm dealing with more these days, is both posture and balance are impacted. And one of these days I'm going to start wearing a bicycle helmet in my home. And when I determine that that's what it takes to be outside safely, then I'll wear it outside the home. But falling and hitting your head is one of the most significant dangers to senior citizens in general. With Parkinson's, it's exaggerated. There's more of it. Lots of automatic movements. I told you before that my arm just stopped swinging, so left arm would be swinging walking down the street, and this one would not swing unless I thought about it. And as soon as I started thinking about it, it started swinging. And as soon as I was distracted, like by a crack in the sidewalk or anything, it stopped swinging. It's just things that you take for granted automatically aren't automatic anymore. So, speech changes, voices get softer. I'm glad I have a microphone. This is a great help to me. And writing. You may have seen the writing from people with Parkinson's. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's completely illegible. unless you do something to fix that, like use pencils like kindergartners use, great big pencils, because you don't have fine movements, so you hold on to it. So those are some of the symptoms. If you have them, some of them go with aging, but in a more severe form, then they go with Parkinson's. And there are, I said, about 30 of them, but those are the major ones. So life with Parkinson's is nothing if not interesting. It's a challenge, but single biggest thing you can do if you have it is exercise. They're discovering, for years, it was pills. There is no cure for Parkinson's, and so you get pills. Parkinson's people take lots of pills because you get one specific to this symptom and specific to that symptom and the other. So I take 5 prescription vitamins. I swore I would never have this happen in my life. I'm not going to be like my grandmother with all her pills. Well, never say never. So I take a handful of these to address this or that symptom, and they actually do a very good job of it. But they're discovering even better than that is exercise. It's worth more than a pill in addressing concerns. It's good for you. It's just walking, anything you can do to keep moving, because remember, the body is tightening up all the time. So if you can walk and swing your arms and move your legs, then you're pushing in the other direction. And that's a good place to be. So exercise. And the special training program, which I just took in the month of May, 16 days of instruction over 4 weeks down in Denver. It was quite a commitment, but it is terrific. And it's a series of stretches that you do, such that by the time you're done, you stretch in every direction there is, up, down, and sideways. And it releases all this pent-up energy. I've never slept so well in my life as I have the month I took this class, because I was so exhausted. And we're not doing push-ups, we're not doing sit-ups, we're not running in place, we're stretching. And that just releases the energy that's being pent up in your joints, in my joints. So it was quite an experience. I thought, oh, this is interesting, but this isn't going to do any good. It's very powerful stuff. So there are tools out there that can help deal with it. So when I talk with people about Parkinson's, I try to emphasize 3 points. First of all, memory loss is another issue. I hate it when that happens. I'll come back to it in a minute. What can you do if you have Parkinson's? Well, first of all, go to a doctor and get a diagnosis and be under a doctor's care. I used to go in every 6 months. Now I go in every 3 months, and it will be as often as needed just to check and see how my symptoms are. The first thing, I'm going to get these 3, is that you do nothing to cause this. As I said before, you can't catch it, you can't give it to anybody. It's just the luck of the draw. There's some concern, there's some school of thought that says if you've been in an environment, a high chemical environment, so there's fertilizers or something in the air, you might be more inclined to get it, but they don't have a definitive link yet. So you don't do something to make this happen for yourself. The second point is that you can do something about it. There is no cure, but you can do things which maintain your quality of life and enhance it as you proceed. And the last thing to remember, and which is why particularly I came here today, is that you're not alone in this. It impacts 1 in 135 people on average will get this. So it's not uncommon at all. There are millions of people in this country who have it. And one of the ways to connect with them is through support groups. But there's really support at 3 levels. There's something called the Parkinsons Foundation, which is based in New York City, and they have wonderful resources online that you can access, webinars about every subject you might possibly ask. How does this affect hearing? Does it affect hearing? It affects speech because the muscles in the neck change over time with Parkinson's. And you have to be more careful about choking. For example, you chew your food very thoroughly. So they have resources. If you look up Parkinson's Foundation on the internet, you will find just a wealth of resources you can access from the comfort of your home. If you're interested, lots of things to read and do, webinars to attend. The second level is the state level. And there is an entity here in Denver called the Parkinson's Association of the Rockies. And I have the brochures here with me, and I'll leave them in case any of you might be interested. They create the support groups, the individual ones, such as the one that occurs here, and provide whatever kind of resources they can come up with to help address whatever issue it is you might have. They're wonderful folks. They're going to come, a couple of them are going to come to the first support group meeting on the 6th of August, as they want to relaunch all of the support groups, because most of them stopped during the pandemic. Some went to Zoom. And this group, for example, went on hiatus. Although this group has a subgroup called the Caregivers, and they meet the Thursday, the day before. This group meets the first Friday of the month. Day before that, at 3 in the afternoon, at the Lariat Loop Lodge next door, are the caregivers, the spouses, the friends, the support system for those people with Parkinson's. And that group very much needs support as well. It's very, very challenging to be the long-term caregiver to someone with a debilitating and evolving disease. So offer support there. There are actually 3 support groups in Evergreen, which I'm tickled with. It's pretty amazing given the size of our area. 2 of them are run by the same person who isn't me. Her name is Susan Westcott, and she works for the Evergreen Parks and Rec Department. And they offer a class that is very popular with people with Parkinson's. And the class is boxing. Now, who'd have thunk? People who move slow, who are tight, who have challenges walking and maintaining posture. This is the current favorite throughout the country. They're finding that the skills that they teach in this boxing class are memory skills, flexibility skills. You learn patterns of punching, so upper left, lower right, whatever the pattern is. And it addresses the issues specific to Parkinson's. So there's I think she said she had 35 or 40 people who have taken this boxing class over the last couple of years. And it was started because of the efforts of somebody in this, at the time, in the support group, Marilyn Sandifer, who's very active in this community. So Susan has this class, and just a week or so ago, she went online with these folks. The boxing class is virtual. You're punching, whatever you're punching, in your living room. There is an on-site class, but her people come from all over the country. So she started a support group a couple weeks ago. I attended the first meeting, and these folks were just so hungry to talk to somebody who knew what they were talking about. They're taking the boxing class at home, and what they need is some kind of social activity. So she started a support group online. So that's one. The second one is the caregivers group, who meets the day before the people with Parkinson's support group, and then the Parkinson's support group, which we're starting up again. So there are 3 options up here, which I just think is pretty neat. Wonderful little community. So does anybody have any questions, by the way? Okay. They can for some people. Again, no 2 people have the same experience. They usually start with a thumb. You just get this gentle little twitch in the thumb. And this has become, I'm sure you can see it, noticeable enough in the last 6 months or so. For me, it's not. If I'm stressed, then all bets are off. Then the left arm gets involved, which normally doesn't. I have one friend whose whole body shakes. We had lunch recently, and that was new since the last time we had lunch 4 months earlier. So tremors, I can't speak too much to them, but they can occur at any time that I know of. And of course, the disease doesn't care whether you have a diagnosis or not. A lot of people put up with whatever it is or don't understand that it's evidence of a problem and maintain. I used to be a tour director, and I remember this is before I realized that my arm wasn't swinging and my foot was dragging. I was in Washington, D.C., studying to be a tour guide in Washington, D.C., and I'm walking around the whole mall area, which is a large area if you've been to Washington, and I just noticed that it seemed to take forever to get from one side to the other, that I was walking really slowly. Didn't think a thing about it. It wasn't for another 4 or 5 years that I accumulated enough other symptoms to say, this isn't coincidence. These are all problems with my neurology. So I went to see a neurologist. When he was done, he said, I had MRIs of I had three of them. My head, my neck, and my lower back, to rule out other causes of the symptoms that I was having. He said, by the process of elimination, we arrive at Parkinson's. And would you like to make an appointment to see our motor disorder specialist? Which I did, and self-diagnosed myself before he walked in the room, and sure enough, he agreed. That's what it was. So we had as many as 15, 16-ish, somewhere in there. It had grown smaller. The caregivers group persisted even after the respective spouse or whoever they were caretaking with had passed. The support of people who knew what this was all about was just huge. So most of the people at the current caregivers group don't have a spouse or a significant other with Parkinson's anymore. So now they're learning about life after Parkinson's together and supporting each other with that.
Is there anything else you need from us while you're
No, this is a wonderful resource to us. We have as many tables as we could expand out to, and the kitchen, and no, this is a perfect venue for us. And I actually was really honored to hear that y'all were sort of protecting our time slot on Friday, first Friday, in case we came back. And I can't tell you how wonderful that feels, to be invited and to know that people are noticing what's going on and how they can help. So that in itself is just a huge gift to us. So I'm hopeful. If we were to get up around 10-ish people, and maybe we will, sooner rather than later, that would be wonderful. It's just a venue to talk and know that the other people in the room have been where you are. I hear comments from group members all the time of how important this group is to them and how important it is. And it's not easy getting out the door with someone who is struggling to stand up or meeting those challenges. So We appreciate very much. You're welcome. And I know the Parkinsons Association of the Rockies was just tickled when I wrote them a week or so ago saying, they want us to come back, they want us to come back. So it's really important to us. So let me see what I forgot. I think I said all the things I came to say. You can't get it from anybody. Oh, that's it. So, well, you're very welcome. I hope to visit with other entities in the area that have people who might benefit from knowing about this and see if we can't get them. It's so important. You're not alone. You don't have to go through this by yourself. And just getting out and talking to people and venting this week's frustration about how long it took to brush teeth or whatever the issue was is just really supportive. Then you can let go of that and get on with the rest of the challenge that you're facing. So thank you very much for inviting me here.
Our sermon scripture for today comes from the Gospel of Luke chapter 5, verses 17 to 19. One day Jesus was teaching, and Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting there. They had come from every village of Galilee and from Judea and from Jerusalem, and the power of the Lord was with Jesus to heal the sick. Some men came carrying a paralyzed man on a mat and tried to take him into the house to lay him before Jesus. When they could not find a way to do this because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and lowered him on his mat through the tiles into the middle of the crowd, right in front of Jesus. It's the word of the Lord for the people of God. Thanks be to God. If you'll please pray with me. Lord, may the words of my mouth and meditations of my heart be acceptable to you. May all that's done in this service today do nothing other than help us to seek justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with you. Amen. So when I learned that July is Disability Pride Month, and coincidentally Mary left a call at the church asking if the Parkinsons group could meet at their usual time. And so I thought it was great that she also mentioned that she would come in and speak to us. So I'm very thankful for that. Last month we had the opportunity to take a trip to the Santa Fe Arts District together. And one of the galleries we got to visit was Access Gallery, which is a gallery which works with artists with disabilities, both neurological, mental, or physical disabilities. And they offer classes and spaces for them to paint and create, and they showcase their works, and they do a lot of public advocacy around disability. And in this last year, I've noticed that we've seen somewhat of a huge increase in accessibility, especially in media. I've noticed that subtitled options are more prevalent and a lot easier to access than they used to be. I play video games, and many of the games I play have increased accessibility options, like colorblind modes, for instance. And now many of our government official broadcasts from the state to the national level include a sign language interpreter. So they live stream these press conferences, and then there's a sign language interpreter. And this is not something I think I ever saw 5 years ago, or maybe even 3 or 2 years ago. This seems pretty recent to me. And now with live streaming over the internet and Zoom and things like that, it's much easier for people who cannot leave their homes for whatever reason to engage in a plethora of activities and programming that previously was walled off to a lot of people, which includes church. I am also reminded with a greater saliency this year how much room there is to grow and get better, to be more accessible. I've learned that people had to fight tooth and nail to get slopes installed at the corners of sidewalks so that wheelchair users or people who have difficulty walking can navigate the sidewalks and, cross the street more easily. I've learned that folks on the autism spectrum have a lot of unmet needs when it comes to being in the workplace, and that has really come to light when they've been able to work from home and not have those kinds of distractions or difficulties, and they're worried about going back into the workplace that will ignore the needs they have. And I'm also worried that places will begin to call their online offerings and options, and slowly that wall of inaccessibility will kind of reform itself. I've also learned that people with disabilities who marry often lose their disability benefits. I've learned some horrible things about the ways in which persons with disabilities are regularly discriminated against, including some horrific medical things that are inflicted upon them. But it has been a joy to see that we're growing and getting better in the ways we are accessible to folks. But as we well know, things don't always move at the speed or even to the resource level that we need them to. I believe our Facebook videos have auto-generated captions available, but that technology is very much still in development. If you relied on that, you would think I preach some very weird sermons, which I do preach some weird sermons, but the technology doesn't always capture the words I'm speaking correctly. It'll think I said something much different than what I actually said. And I know that, that technology is a boon. It can also just be very confusing. Sometimes when I'm watching a video like that and I can't understand what the speaker is saying, I turn on those captions and then I really don't understand what the speaker is saying. And so we have that available, and I try to post our sermon text online and have that option available, but it's beyond our resources and capacity to have every word of worship written down correctly or to have a sign language interpreter here. We've also tried listening devices, and I think Donna can tell you how well the listening device here works. It doesn't. That's the answer. But all this is to highlight that we are working on ways to be accessible, but the ways we do it are not always foolproof. Like our listening device, which brings up static half of the time, or the auto caption generator generating captions for somebody else's sermon, not mine, because the words are just all wrong. So sometimes our striving for accessibility or opening up the table for folks to come and gather meets roadblocks. The church I served in Chicago wanted to install a wheelchair ramp on their front. They had a lot of older members, folks that had trouble walking up those stone steps. But because the church was in a historic district, they were not allowed to install the accessibility ramp in the front because it marred the historic preservation of the building. And I guess that's what you get when the president owns a home a block down from you. So instead, they had to build a ramp in the back, which means the ramp had to be removable. They didn't have as much room back there because you have to do maintenance work. You have to be able to remove the ramp. So before they put the ramp in, it would be wise to do some tuck pointing and other maintenance, which is already costly. And to get the ramp in there, they'd have to demolish some of that back part where the back steps were for it to be ADA compliant and to fit and meet the kind of standards and regulations that they want a wheelchair ramp to have. So now suddenly this ramp would cost tens of thousands of dollars to implement that they just did not have. So it never got built. Sometimes accessibility is a hard and long fought battle. I shared a picture on the Monday update of Access Gallery's teaching artist Javier Flores' study of Pablo Picasso's Guernica, and you can go back in your email and find this. But his piece recontextualizes the Guernica to be a celebration of those who worked and protested and fought for the Americans with Disabilities Act to get passed. And that celebrated its 30th anniversary in 2020. Only 30 years has the ADA made most things a little more accessible. And so this piece shows pride in the results of the struggle, but also it's an anguishing reminder that legislation and change often happens much slower than it should. I love this story of the man and his friend's commitment to having him meet Jesus. They know what he needs. And it's probably the thing he's asked for, to go meet this miraculous healer. And so he wants to go see Jesus, and the friends want to bring him to see Jesus, but the massive crowd halts them on their way. So they find a way for their friend. They climb on top of the roof and they lower their friend to Jesus, despite the fact that everybody around them probably thinks that they're nuts, if not extremely rude, for climbing on top of a roof to lower their friend down, despite the difficulty they probably had to go through to get that man up onto the roof. They love their friend enough to do this extra work of getting him the access he wants and desires to Jesus. And I didn't read this part in the gospel reading, but the text says that when Jesus saw their faith, he told them that their sins are forgiven. Not to mean that this man was paralyzed because he was sinful, but this was an assertion by Jesus that he is both the Son of God, able to forgive sins, and the way that these friends looked out for their loved one and how they lived for one another in that moment was redemptive. Out of the many things I've learned or internalized in the last year, one is that disability can take many forms and function in many different ways. As Mary said, even about Parkinson's, that it's a little bit different for everybody. Some disabilities are invisible or only visible under the right conditions, something like chronic fatigue. And some disabilities are physical and some mental and some cross over between the two, and I think Parkinson's is a great example of that. Some people are more or less affected by their disability, and society at large can be more or less accommodating to one disability or another. But what has been made especially salient to me is that disability is rarely a binary. It's rarely a thing you're in of or out of. I saw my doctor, and they tell me I probably developed tendinitis in my hamstrings. And now I can feel it if I stand in one place too long. Or the other day we went on a walk with the dog and I took a wrong turn and ended up walking about another mile and my hamstrings were sore. And as we age, our eyesight goes, or our hearing goes. Sometimes our mental faculties go. Sometimes we lose the ability to walk. Or we may suddenly be in an accident that takes a leg or an arm from us. Maybe one day we get the diagnosis of Parkinson's. Some days migraines are so common and so debilitating that we can't get out of bed. And other days we might just feel like $1 million. So it's that disability is less like a binary and more like a range. In any given day we may find ourselves shifting around that range. And wherever we find ourselves on that range, any given day could be different. But wherever we find ourselves on that range, we can make life more accessible for ourselves and for others. To rearrange the world we live in so that disability becomes less disability, less disabling. Instead, it becomes just difference. Now, Jesus tells the host of the luncheon to invite not his friends and the ones who can repay him, but when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. And at this time, there were different thoughts about disabled persons and poor persons, about their worth in society. And we assert today that people with disabilities and the poor and the lame and the blind have a lot, actually, to repay us with. but I see this as a proclamation of the vision of heaven on earth, an invitation to the feast of love that's extended to all, not just people who we have something to gain from, not just people who it's easy to invite and have them sit at the table, but the vision of heaven on earth is that all, as they are created, as they are today, are welcome to God's feast of love. And that vision means removing the stigma of being disabled, removing our own conceptions that we are somehow immune from the effects and trials of disability in our own lives, and that we keep removing obstacles and keep honoring and celebrating the folks around us however they come to the table. But as we know, progress can be slow. And oftentimes there are major obstacles to accessibility that require a lot of work and fight to overcome, which is why we need to be like the friends of the man with paralysis. To realize that we ourselves may one day be affected by this disability if we are not already. And this means having faith. A faith which engenders trust between us and among us, where we can say what we need for our life to be thriving and have the people around us to make that possible. It means having a faith in the fact that life is better when our friends and family and strangers, when all of the people around us can be involved. And that life is better when that vision of heaven on earth is realized as a feast where all are invited and given access, and life is just so much better for it. And that's a faith that is redemptive. I think a good example of a group of friends coming around and surrounding somebody is when Dolores broke her ankle. The people that came to help her out, to make sure she had life thriving at that time, was incredible to see. When it seemed like nobody else, no other entity wanted to help her, this community surrounded her with love. And she often told me at that time she just had no idea. She had no idea how many friends she had. So happy Disability Pride Month. And wherever you are on that spectrum from ability to disability, I pray we can celebrate by showing true pride in all of us as God created us as we are now. And we can do that by extending our invitation and making the feasts of the Lord more accessible, by listening and following the lead of disabled folks and trusting God to guide us. Trusting God to bless us and trusting that however we are a reflection of the divine image. Amen.